Hi guys, Max from EvaResto here, and today I'm fitting this lovely 4-inch narrow beam, one of our own units, into this 1967 right-hand drive Beetle. Putting together I'm going to show you like a bit of a rough guide, how to install the beam itself, torsion bars, grease seals and trailing arms, hopefully just making the job of fitting your own beam as straightforward as possible. So, like I just said, this is the beam we fit into the car, and it's a pretty run-of-the-mill 4-inch narrowed adjustable ball joint style, so 66 and onwards beam by ourselves. Nice thing about these is there are no body mods fit with a sort of special dog leg shock tower. They're 100% new construction, so there's no original parts used. They are bushed with nylon, which is nice, lasts really well. Absorbs a little bit of impact, but not super soft like urethane, doesn't squeak, anything like that. And yeah, just to set at nice angles, so you've got plenty of range there. Laser cut shock towers, laser cut uprights. It's a really nice construction, and a 4-inch is a good all-rounder. You know, 90% of the beams we sell are 4-inch, and it's good for pretty much every lowering setup. You know, it looks nice and narrow without looking ridiculous. It gives you a lot of clearance for a lot more different types of wheels and that, without, you know, necessitating any body modifications or any crazy handling changes or anything like that. Now, these are the parts we're going to be fitting. We've got the new stuff on the left here, and we've got the old stuff off of the old setup on the right here. I've already been through these parts and cleaned them up, given them the world's fastest refurb, bit of black paint and that. And I'll show you a couple of things now, what we want to do. So these are the trailing arms. These are obviously going to be going in the new beam. I've checked the ball joints on these. They were new fairly recently, new by the looks, because they're in pretty good condition. And I've given these surfaces, the bearing surface of the arm, a bit of a going over. So clean them up best I could, and then I've gone over them with some light sandpaper to remove any sort of surface defects and that. And that's the same for all of them, just because you want to make sure these are all in nice condition, because if you get any areas on these that have got sort of gouges on that end, and it'll wear the bushings out of the beam prematurely, and you don't want that. So if you've not got good ones of these, get good ones of these. Steering box wise, you know, just cleaned it up, painted it, Pitman arm, original steering damper, body mount rubbers, and the original grub screws as well for the torsion bars. And then for the new parts, obviously we've got the beam. We've got some nice 4-inch narrowed torsion bars or torsion lead sets. We've got some lovely 4-inch narrowed right-hand drive track rods with new ends as well. We've got some lovely new grease seals, some new locking nuts for the, or jam nuts for the torsion bar pins. And we've got some nice shortened gas shocks as well. There's nothing to say you can't use your original stuff for pretty much all of this bar of a beam. So torsion bars, you can of course narrow your own, but that's time consuming, and to be fair, you've got to have the right tools to do it, because it really isn't easy to do with the wrong stuff. You've got to have the right drill bit for it, pillar drill ideally, and you've got to get the measurement absolutely bang on. But you can do them yourself, it's just whether you've got the stuff to do it or not. Same with track rods. So these are new track rods in 4-inch narrow right-hand drive. Again, you can narrow your original ones, but you've got to cut them down and then re-tap the ends, which again is a bit of a pain. So sometimes for some people it's easier to buy new ones. Some people cut and weld them. I wouldn't recommend that at all. So for this setup, we've just gone through a new set of these. Grease seals, it's nice to put new ones on anyway. Jam nuts, of course, because I've got them on the shelf ready to go. And then the shocks, which we could use the old ones, but they're probably the wrong length. If you're going for a lowering setup anyway, it's nice to go for an uprated set of shocks, which is what we've got here. So all this stuff here is available from us, and this is what people typically go for when ordering like a lowering setup for the front end, to make it easy for themselves. You know, they've not got any extra work to do. It's all just sort of bolt together and bolt in then. So we're over by the bench now, and I'm going to show you how to fit the torsion bars. So these into the beam itself. So they're going to sit like that. You've got one at the top, one at the bottom, dimple in the middle. This is the centre of the beam. This sort of sits like that in the beam. You can see how that sits like there. And on this, you've got like a long locking bolt and nut on the outside, and like aluminium wedge. And then you've got like a small pointed grub screw on the inside there. And what we've got to do, we've got to remove this part. We've got to rotate this around so we can access that part there, fit the torsion bars, tighten it down, and then install them. And I'll show you how to do that now. So these are the adjusters on the beam from the outside, and these are what we call like a Swayaway style adjuster. Quite superior to the old style sort of toothed adjuster. These are a little bit easier to adjust, a lot safer, and they give a lot better ground clearance. So we've got to remove, I'm going to remove quickly these pieces here, these adjuster screws, just to gain better access. I'm going to whip these out as well, so take the nuts off, take the bolts off, and then I'll show you how to install the bars themselves. So I've removed these parts here from the beam, and I've also sort of backed off the adjuster screw as well to give us a little bit more room. Because what this does is it goes into the beam, into this hole here, and it allows adjustment of this core piece here, which allows torsion bars to twist, gives you that lovely adjustability. So I've removed that, and of course if you remember, the centre of the beam has a core, this is like the centre of the beam here, has the bolt sticking out that way, and it's got a small grub screw there. So we've got to rotate this part around here to access that. And for that, I'm going to use a really small screwdriver, like so. So when you move that all the way to the top, you should just about be able to access the bottom screw here. And it's a bit awkward with one hand, but I'm almost there. So that's the top one. Bottom one, I'll do the same, rotate that around. These might be a little bit stiffer, they might have got a bit more persuasion, but there you go. And that's us with the sort of the grub screws that hold the torsion bars accessible now. So now for fitting the torsion bars, you're going to want to wind these little grub screws out a little bit until they're about flush with the tubes of the beam, top and bottom, like so. You'll get one of your torsion leaf assemblies, find the dimple in the middle, line it up like that, and this side here, so when you're looking at the beam, the left hand side, this dimple needs to face towards you. This is for a ball joint beam, a link pin beam, they're not sided, whereas ball joint ones are. And what we're going to do here is we're going to push it through the end of the beam, through the adjuster, slide it along, and then tighten it down onto that dimple there. And these are ones that I've supplied, so these are our own narrowed ones. And if you look at the end, I've sort of, obviously where the dimple is, the end of it, I've rounded it off as much as possible, and then sort of clamped it together quite tight. Because this shape here, if you look at it, it's like a beehive shape. That's got to locate into the middle of the beam, and it's not, if you don't get all this right, it can be quite tricky. So I'm going to give that a go now. So remember the way we said was that in the middle, that this side facing outwards, pull that through, there you go. Push that all the way home, like that. Level it up, sort of centrally. And I'll show you next how to get this bit here tightened down in the right place. So with these torsion bars fairly central, so as much as you can sort of say by eye, we're going to want to take this centerpiece here, so this grub screw, we're going to want to actually remove that totally. So I'm going to pull that out, I'm going to look for the dimple. Actually, if you look, can't quite see on the camera, but the dimple's almost right there in the middle, so I'm just going to wiggle the torsion bar a little bit, there you go. Can't quite see. Sorry about that, but the dimple is right in the middle there. So what I'm going to do, reinstall this is awkward with one hand again, reinstall the grub screw, like so. And you're going to want to tighten that all the way down. You're probably never going to adjust this again, so make sure it's nice and tight. Just give it a good crank, like so. And that's that sorted. Now you've got to do the same for the bottom. So, both torsion bar sets now in place. We've now got to rotate this piece here, top and bottom, back around, and reinstall these adjuster pieces. So, you can do it by hand, but you might need a pair of grips, but they're pretty easy on this one. So, let's put those in as they came out. And be careful with these because they're really, really easy to cross thread. So, nice and gently. Put it in and then just give it a little nip down, but don't touch the nut yet because we've got to adjust all that in the car. So, top one in, bottom one same, nip that back down, just like that. And then I'm just going to put these adjuster screws here back up to whereabouts they were before. So, like there. Now I'm not tightening anything up yet, so none of the lock nuts are getting tightened down, nothing's getting set in place. So we've got to get the arms on, get it in the car first, get the arms on, get the sort of height adjusted to where we want, and then go from there. So yeah, the next bit for this now is actually putting it in the car. we're actually ready now to fit the beam to the car. And just a couple of bits of preparation before that. I've gone over the frame head with like a wire brush and cleaned up any of the loose crud, rust, dirt, that kind of stuff, making sure the beam's going to sit on there nice and square. And I've also put the original body rubbers back on top of the beam, because we can't actually do those once it's in place, so they need to go on first. Now, everything's sorted, so we're going to fit the beam onto the car. If you've got a mate to help you, by all means use them, because they are quite a heavy unit with the torsion bars and all that installed. But because I've got a ramp, I'm going to do it myself. I have got some new bolts as well to put it on with, which make life easier, but you can just as easily clean the old ones up again. I have put a little bit of anti-seize on these as well. I wouldn't recommend using thread lock or anything like that. So yeah, get that now. Lift it sort of into position, line up on the body mounts at the top, and put it in like that, and slot it home. Lovely. And then go ahead and put a couple of the bolts in. Here we go. And that's the hard bit done. So, with the beam all on, looking nice, next step is to fit the trailing arms, which we've already been over these, given them a clean up, make sure there's no rust, no damage, no, gouging, nothing like that. So they're good to go on. But before then, we have to fit the grease seals, which go on the bottom tube and the top tube here. And there's 4 grease seals on a beam. What we use here, we use a combination of late and early ones, because of the tube sizing we use is slightly different to OE. So the top seal, we use a pre-66 style, which is just like a sort of chunky rubber kind of thing. And then for the lower, we use a normal 66 and onwards rubber. And they fit pretty easily. So the bottom one just pushes straight into the recess on the beam, like that. And that's lovely. And then the upper just fits onto the trailing arm, like this. Slide it all the way down, leave it there. That's lovely. And then we're coming to fitting the arms themselves, which I always prefer to use quite a good amount of grease on these when you install them, something like this. Just a general purpose, lithium grease, lithium-based grease, go over like this. Make sure it's a nice coating on all the surfaces. And then to install, so if you look at where the dimple is, facing downwards, about sort of 5 o'clock or so, what I'm going to want to do is put the arm in to sort of match that. So try and keep it as straight as possible, like that. I can feel it engaged on there now, which is nice. And then to send that all the way home, plastic mallet, a bit of a smack, make sure there's nothing binding, and you want to line it up on the dimple that you'll see through here. So I've got to continue knocking that until, there you go, I'm right there. So I'm going to go ahead and put one of the grub screws in now, like so. I'm not going to tighten this down just yet. I'm just going to nip it in place. So it's moving. There you go. And then the same again for the lower. So here's the lower one, cleaned up, ready to go. I have put some grease on this already, but a little bit more won't hurt. I mean, these have got to be clean, because if we've got any sort of rust on them or damage or anything, they can wear the bushings out too fast. But if they're like this, nice and clean, they'll last as long as an original. And yeah, right, so again, pay attention to the orientation of the dimpled piece there. Start to sort of put that in position. This one's a little bit firmer to get on. There you go. I can sort of feel that engaged on the torsion bar now. So I'm just going to go ahead and drive that fully home. There we go. A little bit more. Lovely. Just thought I'd show you quickly before we do carry on what the dimples look like lined up with the hole for the grub screw. So you want to make sure this here is lined up as perfect as close as possible before you install the grub screws all the way down. Then it's as simple as fitting the grub screws. I'm using the original ones here, but it is nice to use new ones sometimes. Tightening them down all the way, making sure not to over tighten them, because the heads on these strip super easily. There you go. And then finally adding the locking or jam nuts. And that is the arms of this side all fitted up. So you just want to make sure they move fairly freely and aren't being held up by nothing, but they will be a little bit stiff at first, just until the bushings sort of bed in. But yeah, that looks lovely. And then of course tighten these down all the way. Now, very important. And that's almost it for beam installation. Just one more thing now, and that's packing it with grease. So what we tend to use is something like this, like a lithium, same stuff we used before on the arms, but obviously this is for the grease gun. So it's just a multi-purpose lithium-based grease, sort of stuff you'd use in wheel bearings or whatever. It's basically what VW would have recommended in like a standard axle. And all we're going to do is just do each corner like this. So you'll be able to get quite a bit of grease in, but all you're doing is you're filling sort of this gap here, because there's a bushing that sits here and there's a bushing that sits about here, and the gap between them is what you're going to be filling with grease. And it'll take quite a bit. Not sure how many pumps, but what will happen in a second is the resistance will go up like that. There you go, and a little bit, you know, it just comes out the edge like that, and that means you're done. So as far as beam installation goes, we're pretty much there now. We've got the beam in, obviously the torsion bar's in, all the trailing arms back on. I've done the greasing, so that's sorted. And now it's just a case of fitting up the rest of the parts. So we've got the steering gear and all the assembly stuff. We've got the shock absorbers, steering damper, spindles, and of course the brakes. So I'm going to fast forward fitting all that, and that'll be it for this video then. So this is pretty much complete now. We've got everything back on where it should be. Some nice shortened shocks on there, narrow track rods back on, steering box and arm back on, some drop spindles on there as well. And all that's really left to do is put the wheels on, set the adjusters up, and set about looking at what sort of height we want it to sit at. And I'm going to cover all of that in the next video. But for now, that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching.